Appreciate your time. Joining me now is Congressman Ted Lieu. He's a Democrat from California and obviously former impeachment manager during Trump's second impeachment proceeding. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's start with that last point that I was talking to Joshua about, your reaction to this news from the Washington Post that Trump's former chief of staff met with Philip Waldron, the man who reportedly circulated this PowerPoint presentation as possibly as much as, as many as 10 times. How do you see Meadows here and Waldron and this PowerPoint document fitting into the efforts to overturn the election based on what you've seen and learned?
Thank you, Ayman, for your question. That PowerPoint presentation is a highly disturbing document. It is a roadmap to a coup. I'm a member of Congress, and last term, I didn't have access to the chief of staff of the President of the United States. I wouldn't have been able to meet with him. But somehow you had people who were planning a coup that had direct access to the chief of staff of the former president of the United States. And that is highly disturbing. Who knows what Mark Meadows was thinking, which is why he needs to testify before the January 6th committee. And because he stopped cooperating, I believe the House is going to hold him in contempt. And we're at a very dangerous time in our democracy where you had people who were planning a coup who are not being held accountable.
Do you feel, Congressman, that we right now, both our democracy and certainly this Congress, we are on borrowed time? And I only ask that from the context of if we assume what some political analysts are saying, that Republicans will take back control of Congress next year. And I'm not making that assumption, but there is that analysis based on the way they're redistricting and gerrymandering right now. You have the January 6th committee that is basically it essentially is going to have an expiration date to try and get their work done. Do you think that they will be able to finish with all of the legal speed bumps that Trump's people keep throwing down with denying their requests for interviews and cooperation, and that we know what might happen with another coup beyond next midterms elections and presidential elections?
The goal of the January 6th committee is to finish before the midterms next year. Now, because of delays in the federal judiciary and because of Trump enablers figuring out how to take advantage of those delays, it's not clear they're going to be able to interview all the witnesses that they want to interview, which is why I think we have to invoke the power of inherent contempt. This is a power the Supreme Court has upheld. It will allow the House of Representatives to enforce our own subpoenas. We could fine people. We could put people in confinement. And what we've learned is if you don't enforce congressional subpoenas, then at some point they become meaningless.
So, Congressman, as an impeachment manager during Trump's second trial over the events of January 6th, you not only know as much about the insurrection as anyone, but also how difficult it can be to get to the bottom of any scheme involving the former president. Congresswoman Liz Cheney, one of your colleagues, tweeted earlier this week that the committee has interviewed nearly 300 witnesses, said the investigation is firing on all cylinders. She's confident they're going to get the answers that they're looking for, but what happens after that? Is anyone actually going to be held accountable? Should we be focusing, not just, I get that it's important to be looking back at what happened in January 6th to prevent it from happening again, but are we putting enough protections in place to prevent it from happening again?
That's a great question. So Congress doesn't enforce criminal laws. That is the job of the Department of Justice. It's a job of state and local prosecutors. So my hope is that prosecutors will look at what the January 6th committee turns up and what information the January 6th committee can provide to them. I'm a former prosecutor. I've looked at these various laws. In Georgia, it is a state crime to interfere in an election or cause someone to interfere in an election. That's also a federal crime. So my hope is that prosecutors will look at this information. What Congress can do is we can pass laws to help prevent this in the future, which is why we have to pass a Freedom to Vote Act. The House has passed that. It's before the Senate right now. And we're working on legislation to also fix the Electoral College Act so that state legislators cannot nullify the popular vote in their own state.
Give me your thoughts on what I was talking about there in my open, that Republicans are basically laying the groundwork to completely undermine our democracy, possibly for decades to come. Are President Biden and others who oppose authoritarianism taking these threats seriously? I know you talked about what, maybe some of the legal challenges that are taking place right now, but, we've talked about 700 cases at the Department of Justice. Most of them so far have been about trespassing. We haven't seen any of them rise to the level of what has been described as an insurrection or a coup on January the 6th.
I do believe the Biden administration is taking these issues seriously, as are members of the House of Representatives. I also know we do have a 50-50 split in the U.S. Senate. There is a filibuster, so we do need every single Democratic U.S. Senator plus 10 Republicans to agree on a number of these issues. That's really hard. The alternative is to have an exception to the filibuster for voting rights and other issues core and fundamental to our democracy. I hope the Democrats in the Senate will see their way to make that exception to the filibuster.
All right, Congressman Ted Lieu, sir, greatly appreciate your time this evening. Thank you for joining us.